So what they're trying to do is limit your mobility in general. They're trying to stop you going, Melbourne to Brisbane, Melbourne to Perth, Melbourne to Bali. They're trying to stop you doing those greater travels that Australians used to do for your holidays and all that sort of stuff. So they can control you. If you stay at home, you can get controlled.
I find this point interesting that we're about to get into, but apparently the New South Wales or Sydney have drafted a legislation to ban petrol by 2030, any petrol vehicle by 2030. So could you share on that?
Yeah, so this was something, I only added this onto the list of stuff today. I was reading up that the Greens, Labor, and even the Coalition in New South Wales have draft legislation ready to go to start banning petrol vehicles from in the next few years, but pretty much really aggressively from 2030. And and the massive push then is to electric or hydrogen or whatever. And hydrogen's not ready to go. Electric's definitely not ready to go. We do not produce enough power at any one point in time to charge the fleet of pretty much the fleet of electric vehicles that we've got now. So you're going to go by, I think it's by 40, the amount of electric vehicles on the road. So there's not enough electricity, and renewables can't produce enough electricity to do it. They just can't. You basically have to carpet Australia in solar panels and windmills to produce enough electricity. It's just mind-boggling. So once again, it's this inner city guilt thing coming about. And what I found really, really interesting is California, they've actually passed the same legislation that New South Wales is looking at, where from next year onwards, cars of a certain age can't be back on the road, and they've got to be replaced with EVs. And every car manufacturer has to have one or two models of EVs or hydrogen powered vehicles, and that hybrid EVs. And then it progressively gets worse. But on Thursday last week, the day that this legislation was put into power in California and announced to the world, the next thing that happened was the Energy Commission in California said, those people that have electric vehicles, please do not charge them between 5 p.m. and midnight. We will not have enough power and we'll have blackouts.
Gee.
Hello. So in the morning, they're announcing a new bill that's basically saying we're going to get rid of all petrol and diesel powered or fossil fuel powered cars. And then in the evening, they're saying, no, don't charge your electric vehicle because we don't have enough power. So and this is always the problem with transition. I actually like electric vehicles. I think electric vehicles are a really good way to go because less maintenance, less moving parts, fantastic to drive. I don't know if anyone's ever driven them, but Jesus, off a standing start quicker than anything. And they're just nice, quiet, calm, easy to maintain and all the rest of it. But we've got to be realistic how to get there. It's not going to work in places like Australia, where you want to drive. At the moment, where I am on the Gold Coast to where I'm going later tonight, right, to jump on a plane is, I think it's 140 something kilometers, right? Most of the EVs on the road, that's nearing their limit, right? A good chunk of them now are getting around the 200 kilometers, 260, and it is growing. But a lot of the cheaper end ones, their limit's 160 kilometers. So I'm going to go 140 kilometers. So I've only got a buffer of not even 10%. Where if I was in a petrol car, I could just pull off and put more fuel in.
Yeah.
So So this is the problem we've got. The technology is not getting anywhere greater, as in the rollout of it, but the legislation to ban it is going 10 times as fast. So we've got a massive gap. Now, once again, there is some controlling elements in this, but I think a lot of it is our politicians are so naive and so don't understand what they're doing, that they've all grown up and going through all these programs with the WEC and all that sort of stuff, that they're all just sitting back there now going, we didn't think it'll go this far. Wow, how stupid are they? And it's just going to get worse. I think countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and possibly Japan are pretty much stuffed in the terms of this ideology, because we now, it's going so far. Now, what could also happen is the pendulum could swing back really quick and we kick them all out and get a whole heap of conservatives. The US is different. It's 52 different countries that make up the federation. Australia should be 7 different nations, mind you, but you know, our states are so weak they give up everything to the feds, and then when the feds try to control it, they can't. But where we're heading is that if we keep going down this path of governments pushing legislation to feel good and create that remedy for the guilt that their inner city voters have, and both parties are chasing the same voter here, mind you. They're chasing the inner city voter. The real people in the outer rings and the working class and the small businessmen, they really have no representation anymore. So we're going to end up in a very, very bad state. We're not going to have enough power. And this, I suppose, this is a good segue into moving into what's happening in Europe at the moment, is if you have a look what's happening in Europe, there's not enough firewood. People are turning back to wood-powered stoves and wood-powered heating. And there's not enough firewood around because the firewood industry was just about gone, because we'd moved to more sustainable and better heating options of, you know, using hot water that was, you know, heated by gas. Well, Russia just turned the gas off. You know, so Europe's in a shit position at the moment, that it doesn't have enough energy, it doesn't have enough nothing, and it's coming into winter. We're coming out. So they're in a really, really terrible state. And that's why this legislation about banning one thing is really bad, because it's the consequences of it. And mind you, politicians really don't care, because all they care about is, now I'm in power for 3 years. We've got to work out how I'll get elected again. So I'll put all this shit through for the first 18 months. Then I'll do nothing for the next 18 months because I'm in campaign mode to get elected again at the next 3-year cycle. So, or in some of the states, 4 years, so you get 2 and 2. But that's what happens. And then all of a sudden, you know, we're 12 years, 15 years down the track, and it's all fallen into a world of shit, because the decisions that were made 15 years ago are now affecting what's happening today, instead of it being the other way around, going, what do we need in 15 years' time to make the country 4 times as great?
Do you also see with the whole change to the energy vehicles, do you kind of see that, seeing as you just mentioned, a lot of people won't be able to afford it? Do you kind of, and Suzanne made this comment, do you see this as a tactic from a government's perspective to drive people to use public transport more, so being able to control them more by making them reliant on even the public transport system?
So I don't think it's about driving people to the public transport system. It's about people not being able to move greater distances. So what we're starting to see around the world is, Qantas just announced it. They're cutting 10% of their flights this summer, right? Because to meet their climate change thing. So what they're trying to do is limit your mobility in general. They're trying to stop you going, Melbourne to Brisbane, Melbourne to Perth, Melbourne to Bali. They're trying to stop you doing those greater travels that Australians used to do for your holidays and all that sort of stuff. So they can control you. If you stay at home, you can get controlled. So the next pandemic we will see is not going to be a pandemic driven by a disease. It's going to be a pandemic driven by climate change. And from that, they will then limit your movement. And that's what they're doing. They're not even hiding it. Qantas, Virgin have all come out and said that they're going to reduce flights. All the major airlines in the US, all the major airlines in Europe of all cutting flights. They're doing it right now. A lot of the Jetstar cancellations from flights in Europe, in Asia, where people are stranded. What I'm hearing is there was nothing wrong with the planes. They had the staff. This is to meet their climate change goals. Is because they're so far behind on their climate change goals that they're now basically just cancelling flights. And Qantas has already admitted that that's what they're going to do. So expect the drive to control people because EVs are going to have limited range versus a petrol vehicle. So your transport will be shorter. Electric buses, electric trains. Have a look at what they're doing in Europe now. And this is controlling the way people go. So if there is a train that does the same route as a plane, the plane will be banned.
Oh.
So if you know Europe, there's trains pretty much everywhere, right? So you won't be able to fly Paris-Marseille because there's a train. Paris-Lyon, there's a train. Paris-Barcelona, there's a train. Paris-London, there's a train. Paris-Brussels, Paris, the Netherlands, Paris, Milan, where else? Zurich, because there's a train. So all of a sudden, what are the airlines going to be doing? They're going to be phasing out airlines. Have a look at where the money is being spent in the aviation world. It's not in long haul passenger transport. It's in short haul, 100-kilometer travel, 19-seat aircraft, eVTOLs, 4 and 5 people aircraft. It's in short haul. There's a big talk at the moment about in Europe, and Europe's really worried about this because a lot of the elite now are setting up their bases outside of Europe and then using their private jets to go backwards and forwards. Europe are now talking about banning private jets. Now, they won't ban it for the elite. They will ban it from those like you and I, that could band together and put, 5 or 6 of us on a private jet and use that travel. That's who they're trying. They're trying to stop people escaping their net. And that's what this drive is, in my opinion, is to stop people moving so they can quickly put a ring of steel around you and keep you locked up. Chengdu in China, Wednesday last week, I think it was, or Thursday last week, went into a full lockdown. 24 million people. Chengdu is the size of Australia, and it's all in lockdown. And they're saying it's for the pandemic, but then you hear little bits and pieces around where they're saying it's because of climate change, or it's because of people were getting out. So that's a direct model of what we're going to see, and it's about making sure people can't travel.
So if there's a cut down on a lot of movement, like what you were saying, because I obviously drive a petrol vehicle right now, but let's say they do create a pandemic in the next 10 years or whatever time frame it is on climate change on that basis, what kind of, because obviously hindsight's a beautiful thing. So if you were prepared for COVID, you would have done a lot better through that pandemic. So with this climate change pandemic, if it does come through like what you're predicting, what are some things that someone like me or everyone on here can start doing to prepare for that pandemic and cut down on movement?
Move somewhere where you're more self-sufficient, right? I've been saying ages, move to greater regional areas, because what will happen then is you'll have better access to food, better access to people that are community minded, and the people in the inner city, they won't sort of worry about you. If you have a look at this, the pandemic that happened, the further you got away from a capital city, the less restrictions you had placed on you, right? So if you're in a smaller town outside of the capital city, they basically forgot about you, pretty much. And it was only those that believed in what was happening on Channel 7 and all that sort of stuff that were in the regional towns, you know, putting 2 face masks on in a car by themselves. They're the loonies. But everyone else was going to cafes, telling the police to get nicked, and the police were, you know, we've got to be seen to be doing something, but we're not going to do anything. We're in the city or in the major regionals like Ballarat. Ballarat's very close. That's where that woman who was pregnant in her pajamas got arrested for inciting, I forget what the term was, inciting rebellion or something, by putting a post on Facebook, right? But further country, Victoria, everyone, you know, just go along. They just couldn't go across the border to get food and that sort of stuff, especially if you're right on the border. But other towns kept going. Like friends of mine in New South Wales, when all the lockdowns were happening there, and they're in regional towns, they were like, "What lockdown? Oh yeah, we heard something about that," but they just kept going around their merry way. So get out of the inner city. If you're stuck in a high-rise apartment, man, it'll be a prison, literally a prison, because they can just lock the doors, turn the elevators off.
And we did say that a little bit in Europe when at the start of COVID, anyone, especially in Europe, and small apartments were pretty much locked in a prison cell. So
what happened in Melbourne? There was those buildings in Melbourne that they fully locked down, and they had to deliver food parcels. So that's what a lot of this stuff is about. So one, if you're in the inner city, it's going to really affect the movement of supplies in and out as well. And you'll have a lot. So as we said last week, Macron has said France is at the end of abundance. There is no more abundance in France. He's declared the end of abundance. Politicians have basically declared the end of abundance in Australia, but they just haven't told you. They're just sneakily going away. Even though now we're starting to see a rebound after the floods of fruit and vegetables and that sort of stuff come back, but there's still shortage of truck drivers to get them into markets, right? But the regional towns still have it. So a lettuce is back to $2. It's not $12 anymore. But, you know, other bits and pieces are. The other thing that we're going to see is, and I don't know when it's going to really happen, the unions are doing a go slow on the wharves, and they always do, especially in the US and in here. But international shipping, because we bring a lot in from around the world and we send a lot out, is the next thing. If they really want to screw with the world, is they'll screw with international shipping, because that's worse, because everything moves long distances by ship, pretty much.
And kind of going back a little bit, I mean, it's kind of follow on from what you were just saying, but especially with the move towards electric vehicles and then just all these lockdowns, do you kind of say that, Christine Evans asked this, but do you see this affecting the actual movement of trucks? Because obviously if all vehicles move to EV, then trucks that are kind of supplying food and goods in Australia, if they can't move long distances, then how is that going to look for Australia?
Oh, 100%. The California legislation basically says that all transport trucks have to be up to, I forget what it is, a Euro 6 standard. Now, only 20% of the trucks in the world meet Euro 6 standard. So you've got all these other trucks that don't meet that standard. and they'll bring, it'll be buried in the legislation. So that means that when a truck goes to get a roadworthy, it won't, because it doesn't meet that standard, so it'll be off the road. One, truck drivers are predominantly self-employed people, right? So that's a way of getting rid of self-employed people. The only people that can afford these new Euro 6 standard trucks are the Lynn Foxes of the world, the Tolls of the world, and the big finance companies, because they're bloody expensive, right? A truck these days is not cheap. You know, a prime mover and trailer, you're looking at $1 million. That's a lot of money for someone. That's a lot of freight that they've got to move. So a lot of people will go back to having to go local. But the long distance transport, Australia survives on long distance transport with trucks. Yes, we could use our rail systems better, but we need to invest a lot into our rail system for that to happen. I said one day, I'll come back from the US once, and then the US has double-decker containers on trains. It's everywhere in the US, especially from sort of the Midwest, the Mississippi West. And I asked someone here in Australia once why we couldn't have double-deck trains. And they said the biggest problem is our rail network was built when double-deck trains never were existed in the 50s, right? They never envisaged the need for double-deck trains. So all our bridges, or the majority of our bridges, are too low. And even with the redesigned cars and all that sort of stuff, it's too hard for these trains to get closer into the city. They can in regional areas, and so our infrastructure is just not built for it. So we've actually got to rebuild our infrastructure. Plus, Australia not thinking ahead. When America built a lot of the railways, they built single, and then right next to it, they built another track. In some areas, a lot of the areas it's still single, but they actually built a lot of dual track stuff, and that's what we need in Australia, is a lot more dual gauge, and then we can use a lot of trains. Now that doesn't stop, and that's not going to stop the trucking industry not being able to get stuff into the city, because who can afford an EV truck? There's not a lot of EV trucks around. I know Volvo has one, Mercedes has one. But I haven't seen any in Australia. There's a couple of guys here in Australia trying to build them, but I haven't seen them. I've seen a couple of hydrogen-powered ones, but you know, where's it all gonna come from? So yes, it will have an effect, a massive effect.
Yeah, they'll probably. Do you think it will force people to go a lot more local? Kind of what you've been saying for a while now.
100%, and everything will go local. So everything will become more local, but forget about if you're in, I don't know, in Perth and wanting avocados from the East Coast, because that sort of stuff's just not going to happen. You'll have to adjust to what you can get locally. I know I'm actually seriously contemplating finding a small Pacific Island nation somewhere and building a farm and having a couple of nice villas on there, so when the world goes to shit, I can get out of the place.
So while buying your own island?
No, not necessarily my own island. You don't have to buy. You can lease islands these days for 99 years. I'm not going to be around in 99 years, but
I'll be moving with you if that's the case.
Yeah. So so that's definitely, but definitely moving to more integrated communities that have everything available to them.